Welcome to Feedback Studio. In other videos, we've explored how to set up rubrics using the Rubric Manager, and we've already highlighted in other videos the 4 different types of rubrics that are available for you to use in Feedback Studio: the standard, the custom, the qualitative, and the grading form. In this video, we're going to explore in more detail the imaginatively titled standard rubric. Now, there are 2 different ways of tackling the standard rubric. There's the long way and there's the short way. There's a long way because one of the key features of the standard rubric is that it will automatically generate a grade for your assignment. But that grade may not always fit the assessment classifications that you need it to. The long version explains how you can use the standard rubric but still have it work within some of the more common classification systems. This is not going to be that long version. This video is just going to show you as quickly and as simply as possible how the standard rubric works in Feedback Studio. And if you want to know more about how you can adopt it to suit your purposes, then you might prefer to sidle over to the longer version. So, here, first of all, we have our Turnitin assignment set up in Moodle, and we're going to open one of the essays that has been submitted into it. Here we are. The rubric icon can be clearly seen in the toolbar on the right-hand side, and if we click on the icon, then the Rubrics panel will open up. It's empty at the moment because we've not attached a rubric. The first thing we need to do then is to go to the Rubric Manager. And we can access this by clicking on the settings icon in the Rubric panel. There is a rubric already in here, one we've used on previous videos on how to set up rubrics. Looking at the Rubric Manager, it's pretty much the same as the one you would have used in the old Turnitin or directly from the Moodle plugin. All the functions are still there, but the digital decorators have been in to make it all look a bit more trendy. Down the left-hand side, we can see the criteria. Across the top, we can see the scales. The title of the rubric is still here at the top, where you can edit it by just clicking on it. And the menu button is still there in the top left corner. The Import/Export button that used to be in the top right has been replaced by a drop-down menu enabling you to select which kind of rubric you want. For this video, we're going to be looking at the standard form, so we'll keep this selected. The import and export functions can now be found in the menu and have been renamed upload and download, which are perhaps more commonly used terms. The attach and detach button has been moved as well. It's now in the bottom left with a clear title and this nice little switch so that you can easily see whether the rubric is attached or not. Okay, so enough about the Rubric Manager. What about the rubric? As you can see from this drop down here, we've selected the standard form of rubric. As with all rubrics, the criteria are listed in this column on the left. These are the categories, if you like, that the rubric is measuring. The scales are the measures themselves, the different standards that those criterion have reached. And these scales are arranged horizontally along the top. A key thing to note that makes the standard rubrics distinct from other kinds of rubrics in Feedback Studio are the 2 sets of numeric values that we can see alongside both the criteria and the scales. These are the sets of numbers that enable the rubric to calculate a grade for the assignment based on the boxes that you select. The percentage numbers next to the criteria are the relative weightings of each criteria. As you can see in this example, there are 4 criteria and each of them has been weighted at 25%. This means that each of the criteria are counted as equally important to each other. Of course, this might not always be the case. For example, you might think that the demonstration of independent thought is more important than the grasp of basic concepts. And so you want the independent thought criteria to count for more than the one for key concepts, in which case you could nudge the key concepts weighting down to 20% maybe, and nudge the independent thought up to 30%. Now, the grade you give for independent thought will count for 30% of the overall grade. So if you imagine we gave a grade of 60% for each criteria, and the total grade comes to 60%, then key concepts would count for 12 of that total grade, and independent thought would count for 18. The rest, weighted at 25%, would count as 15 of the total grade. As long as the percentages next to the criteria always add up to 100%, then you can vary the weightings to your heart's content. Obviously, though, the more criteria you have, the more complicated the mathematics becomes. The numbers alongside the scales represent the grades you give for each of the criteria. They act like grade bands. Each column represents one of those grade bands. For example, the first column might represent the highest grade band, and the last column on the right might represent the lowest grade band. In which case, in order to use the rubric, then you simply need to determine which grade or standard has been achieved for each criteria. Let's see this in action. To begin with, I need to give a point score for each of my scales. Well, I've got 5 scales here, ranging from exceptional to below expectations. So to keep things simple, I'm just going to number them from 1 to 5, with the highest point score going to the highest scale. Now I will attach this rubric to the assignment to see what it looks like. The criteria can be seen in the rubric panel on the right now, and each of them has a slider assigned to it. And as I drag the slider across, you can see the scale being assigned to it just under the title. You can also see the point score associated with that scale being assigned on the far right. As I continue down the rubric, the different point scores will be averaged out into a score just up here at the top. The score itself is measured out of 5 because 5 is the highest value scale. And if we were to give an assignment 5 for everything, then the average would be 5 out of 5. Of course, as you move through the sliders, you cannot actually see the full descriptions of the scales you are awarding. These appear at the bottom of the panel, and as you select each scale, the relevant description will appear, but you might need to drag this little slider up in order to see it more fully. It may be that you would prefer to be able to see the whole rubric as you are assigning the scales, and you can do this by clicking on this little expand button in the corner. Clicking on this will open up the rubric in a window that looks much more like the Rubric Manager, and from here you can simply click the box with the description you think best matches the assignment. The selected box will be highlighted in pale blue, and when you're finished you can simply close the box and the rubric will be updated according to your selections. Now, one final thing. You may have noticed that although the rubric has calculated its own grade here out of 5, the main grade box remains empty. Now this is because the rubric does not have to determine the grade. You can, if you want to, completely ignore the rubric grade. If you did want to use this grade to populate the overall grade, then you can do so by selecting Apply to Grade. You will see that a grade has now appeared in the grade box. By default, Feedback Studio assignments are set up to be graded out of 100, so the grade that the rubric has determined has been here recalculated as a percentage. You can change the settings for the way an assignment is graded in Feedback Studio in the settings in Moodle, and we talk more about that in the video on the Moodle plugin. So there we go. Some of you may be thinking that the grading is potentially problematic for summative work that's graded out of 100, and if you're one of them, then you might want to go on and watch the longer video in which we explore some of the ways in which you can use the standard rubric while grading out of 100.